Today we're going to just take a quick look in the news. I'm sure you all are keeping tabs on, or probably hear on your local and national news channels, what's happening with certain cyber attacks. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to start diving into sort of the nuances. So cybersecurity very much is an intersection between people, process, policies, and technology. And we're going to talk how that fits into your organizations. We're going to talk also about the attack landscape, because I think lots of times when people think about cyber and information security, they immediately think about all those bad guys and who's going to want to come get us. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing at Sightline in the nonprofit space. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we'll talk about cybersecurity through a lens, through a nonprofit lens, of course. And then, as always, you will walk away with some things to do today and some tips to kind of embrace along the way. So I'm going to give you a little bit of homework, and I'm going to give you a teaser for our last session. But for any of you who joined us for the first webinar, and I see a couple of familiar names, I think, in the chat, I was wondering, the homework from our last webinar was, did you make a list of all the hardware, computers, laptops, cell phones, tablets belonging to your organization? And then the second question was, did you make a list of all the services connected to your organization's computer, all of those applications, all those third-party vendors, all of those types of things? So if you've done those two things, you're actually on your way. And please, if you're able to join us for the third webinar in a few weeks, bring all that with you, because we're going to dive into those details. But I hope if you haven't, if you weren't able to join us for the first one and you're here now, take these questions back to your organizations and see if you have this information available. It's a great, great, great first step towards improving information and cybersecurity in your organizations. So, and of course, always feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about how to do these things. So let's jump into what's happening today in the world of cybersecurity nonprofits. And this is something that we mentioned in the first webinar, but I really wanted to emphasize why cyber and information security are so critical to nonprofits. You know, many times in our work at Sightline, we act as that conduit between the security space and the nonprofit space. And what we hear in the security space is, why would nonprofits be attacked? And what do they have of value? And they're doing such good work in the world. Who would ever want to do harm to them? Well, we have to also realize that we're using technology every day. And just by the use of technology and the internet, you are going to be at risk for an attack. But the way we sort of frame it out there in the security space about nonprofits is not to just say, oh, they're in such bad shape, please don't go help them. We're trying to sort of reframe the conversation in the security space to say, what would happen if a nonprofit that you trust to serve the most vulnerable in your communities were no longer trustworthy? And as we go along in today's webinar, we're going to talk about how trust is one of the most valuable assets that nonprofits have. And then we also help to unpack the idea of, what if sensitive information that is being held by the nonprofit is compromised? What if it wasn't being kept safe? Would that instill confidence in your donors, confidence in those that you serve, that you are protecting them? And then, who's going to protect the most vulnerable of them all? So lots of times in the security space, we do see that people want to kind of hand it off to a vendor, a consultant, a volunteer who's a cybersecurity expert, and say, hey, can you please take on this weird thing called cybersecurity? And though that help can be really valuable, what we see at Sightline is that the most important thing to do is to figure out how to bring cybersecurity into your organization so it meshes with your operations, and it meshes with how you do your business every single day. by doing that, it doesn't have to be a hard, laborious, overwhelming type of thing. So we're going to give you some tips on how to do that so that you can feel more confident and that you can actually do cybersecurity for your organization. All right, so what's happening in the world? I think everybody has been hearing about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. These headlines actually were just taken off of the news wire last night, folks. So just so you know, at Sightline, we are working hard to kind of keep a tab on what's going on in the world and understanding how it connects to all of you. So one of the things that we offer up at Sightline is our member forum, where you can get updates and information about events like this happening and why and how it relates to the work that you're doing. So, but one of the things that I keep sort of seeing in the news a lot right now are how attackers on these large scale, very public attacks are pulling out a lot of personal information. And so you might be asking yourselves, well, you know, we weren't really affected by the pipeline attack, and maybe we might be affected by the T-Mobile data breach. What do I do with all this big news information? Well, the way to think about it is to say, okay, you know, maybe not so much pipeline, but certainly T-Mobile. Do you use T-Mobile as a service provider? They're great. I know lots of folks that use them. So if your information were to be compromised through that particular event, what would you do? Or what could you do now just to kind of check in and say, you know, with your staff, say, hey guys, do we use T-Mobile? We do. Oh, you know, maybe we should just keep an eye on what information we're sharing with T-Mobile just in case something weird happens. Let's just be prepared. So it's balancing all of this kind of stress and hype in the news with what can we extract out of that that's reasonable and smart for our business. But I think one of the things that we are seeing a lot at Sightline are more newsworthy reports about attacks happening in the nonprofit sector. So for years, having organizations saying, hey, you know, the nonprofit sector is not going to be attacked, it's not at risk, that is changing. And because it's changing, we want to really help you step into this conversation before it becomes a crisis. Because take it from someone who knows from a very personal vantage point, if you're trying to learn cybersecurity when you are in the midst of an event or you're in the midst of crisis, it is 10 times harder because you're trying to deal with the crisis and protect yourself and do all these things. So if you prepare for it and if you sort of think about it in terms of business operations, you'll be ahead of the game. You may not be able to thwart an attack, but you'll be better prepared for it, which means that you'll probably be able to mitigate some of the damage or some of the impact of an event. So anyway, you'll see lots of stuff in the news. And if you see something around nonprofits, come tell us at Sightline. We would love to hear about it. We do try and keep tabs on things, but we're realistic that there's lots of stuff happening in the world. So of course, if you see something in the news, reach out to us, send us a link, hello@sightlinesecurity.org. So the other thing is, you know, as you're looking at these attacks, is that, you know, we are in such a connected world. And this is also part of the conversation that we're having with the security industry about nonprofit organizations. Because I think in some people's minds, they look at cybersecurity as, oh, that's within our domain. And if we're secure, we're okay. Well, that's true to a point, but we don't live our lives just in a steel box. We are connected to people personally, professionally. We use services, we use vendors. And this connectedness is also what puts us at risk. So at Sightline, we are trying to amplify the state of cybersecurity in the nonprofit sector because of this connected element. We know that all of the donors, all of the big companies that support nonprofits around the world, all those folks that sit on boards, all the volunteers, all of that connectedness makes everybody vulnerable if one part of that food chain is at risk or is not secure. So that is part of this ongoing dialogue that we're having at Sightline about how to create that sort of perception that nonprofits are such an important part of our connected world that we have to make sure that you're just as secure as the big guys. So to put it in a little bit more context, think about the money and time that goes into your organization through your staff, through your volunteers, through your board of directors, through the donors, through people who come to your events. All of that information that you're collecting through all that money and time that is there to support your mission, that goes into your warehouse of information that sits in your organization. And we talk about at Sightline often is, how do you protect that information that's so vital? So imagine, I was talking to one of our members recently who was going to be doing a golf tournament. And this is their annual event. It's a huge fundraiser for them. And they were so excited about it. And I said, okay, awesome. This is a great example to kind of step into a security mindset with a real life example. I said, okay, how do you collect the information of the golfers who are signing up to participate in this golf tournament? And they said, oh, well, they come and they go to the registration desk and they have to, pay to participate, and they take down all this information. They use certain apps, and they have all of these processes. I said, great. So you know the process in which you're collecting this information. Let's talk about how this information is critical to your mission, critical to the trust of the communities that you serve, and how are you protecting it? So it was a wonderful example in a very, kind of, I don't want to say easy, but it was sort of this like, okay, this isn't super high pressure kind of scenario, but it helped them to sort of dial into this idea of the money and time that's given into your organization and the information that you're collecting. How are you securing it? And how does that protect the connections that matter to you? So, and kind of the flip of that coin in that example is, imagine if as a part of that golf tournament, right, you were collecting the names of names of people participating. And if you were compromised, if those names were put out into a cyber attack situation, and those people were compromised, would they hold you accountable? Would they hold you responsible for their information being compromised? Maybe, maybe not. But the important thing is that you want to protect the information that people are entrusting you with as a part of your organization. So one of the things that you can do today is to think about an upcoming campaign, whether it's a virtual campaign or a golf tournament or maybe even a live gala. I hope we get back to the days of live events. Think about, like, walk yourself through the process. What are we capturing from sponsors, from volunteers, and from people attending events, and what are we doing to protect that data? So take it in these small chunks, and it starts to become more muscle memory as you're going on in other parts of the business. So that brings me to this really important notion about cybersecurity that sometimes I think we forget, even in the security space. When people think of cybersecurity, and we talked about this in the first webinar, cybersecurity is the securing of cyberspace, of that space. Information security is the security of the what, the data, right? And sometimes when you think about cybersecurity in that space domain, it can automatically feel, oh my gosh, it's connected to the internet, I'm using technology, I don't know any of that, so I'm not going to think about it. But if we think about the securing of the what, the information, right, then you can start unpacking what I consider are the four most vital things to kind of put into play together. So one is, if you take kind of that golf tournament example, who are the people involved? Okay, if you're thinking about information security, who are the people involved? Who on your staff is collecting that information? Who is touching that information maybe after the event for thank yous or follow-up? Who are the people in the system of protecting that data? Then what is the process that they're stepping through to collect it, to store it, to follow up on it, to use it in other ways, or to save it for next year for when you have to reach back out to those folks.